Families preserved food long before electric freezers by controlling air, moisture, salt, and time. Before electricity entered the home, food preservation was not a hobby or trend. It was a system. Families relied on repeatable methods that worked across generations, climates, and economic conditions. These techniques were practical, predictable, and rooted in an understanding of how food spoils. Remove moisture, limit oxygen, add salt or acid, and slow bacterial growth. That was the foundation. What follows is not folklore or nostalgia. These are the exact systems families depended on to survive winters, droughts, and long supply gaps. Drying food was one of the oldest and most dependable preservation systems. Drying removed the single most important element bacteria needs to thrive: water. Meat, fruit, vegetables, and herbs were dried in the sun, over low fires, or in ventilated lofts. Thin slicing mattered, airflow mattered, timing mattered. Apples were cored and strung on twine. Beans were left in the pod until they rattled. Meat was sliced across the grain and dried slowly to prevent rot. This method is still usable today with almost no equipment. A modern household can dry food using a shaded porch, a well-ventilated attic, or a low oven with the door cracked. Properly dried apples can last months in cloth bags. Jerky made without modern preservatives will keep if fully dried and stored away from humidity. Drying is not about speed. It is about consistency and airflow, exactly as it was a century ago. Salting and curing meat turned fresh protein into long-term security. Salt preservation worked by drawing moisture out of meat while creating an environment hostile to bacteria. Families packed pork, beef, and fish in heavy salt, often layering cuts inside barrels. Over time, the salt penetrated deeply, preserving the meat for months. In colder regions, curing was followed by hanging in smokehouses to add another layer of protection. This method explains why traditional diets leaned heavily on pork. A hog could be slaughtered once and feed a family all year when properly cured. Today, this knowledge can be applied by dry curing small cuts of meat in controlled refrigeration or heavily salting fish before air drying. Understanding salt ratios and patience is essential. This is not guesswork. Old farm records show precise measurements and curing times, many of which still work exactly as written. Smoking food added preservation through chemistry, not flavor alone. Smoke was not just about taste. It deposited phenols and acids onto food, slowing bacterial growth while sealing surfaces. Smokehouses, were designed for cool, slow smoking, not for cooking. Meat could hang for days or even weeks, just absorbing that protection layer by layer. These days, modern smokers often run too hot, kind of missing the original purpose. To really apply this today, smoke should stay below cooking temperature, using hardwoods and, extended time. Fish, cheese, and cured meat benefit the most from this approach. Cold smoking, it requires airflow, patience, and restraint. Exactly the way it did back when families depended on it to stretch their limited resources through the winter. Fermentation allowed families to preserve vegetables and dairy without heat or electricity. Cabbage became sauerkraut, milk became yogurt or kefir, cucumbers became pickles through natural lactic fermentation, not vinegar. The process depended on salt concentration and temperature. Too warm and food spoiled, too cold and fermentation stalled. Families learned these balances through repetition. The result was food that lasted months and improved digestion. This method is easily applied today using glass jars, salt, and thyme. Fermented vegetables stored in cool spaces remain edible far longer than fresh produce. This was not accidental preservation, it was controlled microbial management. Root cellars used underground temperature stability to slow decay. Potatoes, carrots, beets, apples, and squash were stored in separate zones to prevent spoilage gases from spreading. Apples, for example, release ethylene and were kept away from root vegetables. Even today, basements, buried containers, or shaded underground storage can, replicate this system. Temperature control mattered more than darkness. Proper ventilation prevented mold. Families monitored these spaces weekly, removing spoiled items immediately to protect the rest. Pickling in vinegar extended shelf life where fermentation was impractical. High acidity halted bacterial growth quickly. This method was especially common for onions, eggs, and seasonal vegetables meant to be eaten within months rather than years. Today, vinegar pickling remains one of the safest preservation methods when done correctly. Acidity levels matter. Old recipes were precise for a reason. Following those ratios keeps food safe without refrigeration. Fat sealing protected cooked foods from air exposure. Rendered fat was poured over cooked meats and stored in crocks, sealing out oxygen. Known as confit or potted meat, this method allowed cooked food to last weeks or months in cool conditions. The fat layer was not optional, it was the barrier. This technique can still be used today for short-term preservation when refrigeration is unreliable. The key is full coverage and cool storage. Once exposed to air, the clock starts again. These systems work together as a complete preservation strategy. No family relied on a single method. Drying, salting, fermenting, and cellar storage work together to ensure year-round survival. Each method compensated for the weaknesses of the others. This layered approach is what made pre-electric households resilient. Applying this knowledge today is not about nostalgia. It is about understanding systems that function without fragile infrastructure. These methods still work because, biology has not changed. If this kind of practical history matters to you, go ahead and subscribe to Wisdom for the Journey. Share this guide with someone who values real knowledge and keep these systems alive by using them.